What do you do when your own son calls you useless in the company you built and says he is just listening to his wife? How do you stay calm when you discover he has quietly moved your house and business into his name, assuming you are too old and tired to fight? This is how I kept my mouth shut, walked out, and let the systems he trusted teach him what real ownership looks like. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. My name is Thomas Ward, and for most of my life, my name meant something in my town. When people needed concrete, lumber, or steel on a rainy morning, they did not say they were going to the industrial park. They said they were going to Ward's. It was not a big empire, just a solid family business that kept roofs over heads and food on many tables, including mine. I built Ward Building Supply with one truck, a rented shed, and a back that never stopped aching. For decades, when something went wrong on a site, they called me, not a hotline. I was the one who fixed things. These days, when I walk through my own warehouse, people still greet me, but there is a new tone under it. Respect from the older guys, curiosity or mild pity from the younger ones. Some of them look past me toward the glass office upstairs where my son sits with his screens and his meetings. On paper, I am still the founder and a director. In practice, most of the daily decisions now go through Daniel. That was my choice at first. I told myself it was time to let the next generation lead. I did not expect the next generation to act like the first one never existed. That morning started like many others. I parked my old pickup in my usual spot, a little away from the front door so the trucks had room. I walked slowly, feeling the stiffness in my knees, and stepped onto the warehouse floor. The air smelled of dust, wood, and diesel. Forklifts beeped, pallets moved, radios played low in the background. Carlos, my warehouse manager, waved from near the loading bay. He has been with me since our first expansion, back when we still wrote invoices by hand. He called out that a delivery from one of our longtime suppliers had arrived short on items. The driver insisted the count was right. I went over, looked at the paperwork, and talked to the driver. No shouting, no drama. Just questions, numbers, a walk around the truck, and a careful count. We found the mistake. A pallet had been left on the wrong truck at the depot. I called the depot myself, spoke to a supervisor I had known for years, and within 10 minutes we had a plan. Replacement pallet sent this afternoon, credit note applied, driver reassured he would not be blamed. Carlos shook his head with a small smile and told the younger staff that this was why they still needed me on the floor. Upstairs, behind the glass, I could see Daniel moving between the boardroom and his office. He wore a sharp suit, much nicer than any I ever owned. A big screen glowed on the boardroom wall, full of slides and graphs. People went in and out with laptops and coffees. Megan's bright scarf flashed by once as she walked past the window. She does not work for us officially, but she is in the building more often than some employees. She calls herself an unpaid consultant. I call her the voice in my son's ear, the one always whispering about brand, image, and scale. After we solved the pallet problem, I made a slow round of the warehouse, asking about back orders and late deliveries. Most of the crew still came to me first, especially when something did not match what the system said. They trust screens less than people who have stood in the rain with them. One young man, new to the job, asked if he should take an issue upstairs to Daniel instead. He said he heard that all decisions had to go through the new office now. Carlos cut in quickly and said that for stock and logistics, I still knew what needed to be done. I just smiled and told the kid that I was still good for something. He laughed awkwardly and went back to work. Later in the morning, Daniel's assistant came down to the floor, heels clicking on the concrete. She told me that Daniel had scheduled a strategy meeting in the boardroom at 11 and that he wanted me there. Her tone felt strange, polite, but with that edge of someone passing on instructions from the real boss. I nodded and thanked her. She walked away already looking at her phone. I cleaned the dust from my boots as best I could, changed my jacket, and climbed the stairs to the office level. The reception area looked different now. New logo on the wall, new plants, new chairs. Megan's touch, I was sure. The girl at the front desk looked up and gave me a careful smile, the kind you give an elderly relative you respect but expect to see less often soon. I greeted her by name. She almost seemed surprised I remembered it. The boardroom was half full when I entered. People sat around the long table with laptops open, water bottles lined up like soldiers. At the far end, the big screen showed the first slide of a presentation, Ward 2.0, Streamlining for Growth. Daniel stood near it, talking quietly to a couple of managers. Megan sat in a chair along the wall, not at the table, but close enough that everyone could see her. Ellen, our senior accountant, sat near the middle with a notepad. When she saw me, she gave a small nod that did not reach her eyes. Daniel greeted me with a quick smile, the kind you give someone you do not really have time for. He said he was glad I could make it. He did not ask what I thought about the title on the screen. I took a seat near the side, not at the head. I had not sat at the head for a long time. That spot now belonged to my son, the one I had once taught to stack boxes without breaking his back. When everyone was seated, Daniel started his presentation. He talked about market trends, margins, competition, and how we needed to move faster and act like a modern company. He spoke well, confident, smooth, lots of phrases that would sound good in a podcast. He said we could no longer make decisions based on habit and emotion. He said we needed clear lines of authority and simple structures. He clicked through slides showing charts I had not seen before. Most of the numbers meant something to him, I am sure. To me, they were colors and arrows that covered up something much more simple. He wanted control. At one point, he mentioned that our old ways created bottlenecks. He did not say my name at first, but everyone knew who he meant. He said that waiting for sign-off from legacy leadership slowed projects down. He said that clients expected quick answers and that having multiple people with authority confused them. He turned to the table and said that in the interest of speed and clarity, some changes were already in progress. He flicked to a slide with a neat diagram. At the top sat a single box labeled Executive Director. Under it, several smaller boxes for departments. My name did not appear in any of them. Someone near me shifted in their chair. Ellen stared down at her pad. Carlos glanced my way, then looked back at the screen quickly, like someone watching a car crash they could not prevent. Then Daniel said the sentence that drew a line I could never step back over. He said that, from a growth perspective, my role was no longer essential to the daily business. He said he was just listening to his wife, who had advised that keeping an older founder in a visible leadership position made us look small, family-run, and unstable to big clients. He said Megan had explained that investors and partners wanted to see a clear, strong leader who looked like the future, not the past. He did not shout these things. He said them calmly, like facts, like weather reports. He even smiled as he said that I would always be important, symbolically, as the man who started everything. He called me a legacy asset. The room was very quiet. I felt my chest tighten, but my face stayed still. Years on job sites had taught me that losing your temper never fixed a broken beam. A cracked emotion does not hold weight. Inside, the word stung in a way I had not felt even when I broke bones on the job. Useless to the business, legacy asset, not essential. The company I had built with my hands and my sleep, reduced to a brand story for my son's pitch deck. And the worst part was him saying he was just listening to his wife, like he had no agency, like this was something happening to him too. It was easier to blame her, the outsider, than to see that he had chosen every step. After that, Daniel mentioned legal and structural simplifications that were already underway. He used safe language, nothing dramatic. He talked about consolidating ownership and decision-making under a single executive to avoid confusion. He said the lawyers were finalizing things and that soon everything would be under one name. He did not say whose, but he did not have to. Everyone in the room knew. Someone asked a careful question about how this would affect existing contracts. Daniel assured them that nothing important would change for them, only for the sake of signature lines and responsibility. He said this would free up everyone else to focus on their work, without worrying about higher-level decisions. He never once turned to me to ask for my view. It was as if I was a guest at a meeting about a company I had never seen before. When the presentation ended, Daniel thanked everyone for their time. He invited questions, comments, ideas. A few brave people said small, safe things about efficiency and growth. No one mentioned what had just happened to my position. Megan made a light remark about how this would finally give us a clean story for marketing. People gave polite smiles. I thought about speaking. I thought about reminding them where their paychecks came from, how many winters I had stood in cold warehouses signing loans in my own name to keep them afloat. But then I looked around the table and saw the mix of fear, confusion, and calculation on different faces. I understood something then. If I fought here, in this room, with only pride and memory in my hands, I would lose. My son had already prepared this scene. The stage was his. My anger would only make me look like the problem he was bravely solving. So I stayed quiet. I thanked Daniel for the update in a calm voice when he looked my way, pretending to be polite. I stood up slowly and moved toward the door as people began to gather their things. My legs felt stiff, but my mind was strangely clear. The humiliation had done something important. It had burned away the last layer of denial I had wrapped around my son. As I reached the door, someone touched my elbow lightly. It was Ellen. Her face was pale, and she did not meet my eyes at first. She pressed a folded sheet of paper into my hand, quick and secret, and whispered that I should read it later. Then she walked past me and out into the corridor like nothing had happened. The paper felt heavier than its size as I slid it into my jacket pocket and stepped back into the buzzing office. When I finally stepped out of the boardroom, the noise of the office hit me like a softer kind of wave. Phones ringing, keyboards clacking, printers humming. All the normal sounds of business carried on as if nothing had shifted, but I knew something had. I walked past reception, nodded at the girl behind the desk, and made my way down the stairs without looking at anyone for too long. The folded paper in my pocket felt like a small stone pulling me to the ground. I did not open it there. Some things need 4 walls and a kitchen table. At home that evening, the house was quiet. Laura moved around the kitchen, stirring a pot of soup, the same way she had done since the early days when we lived in a small rental with peeling wallpaper. She asked how the meeting went. I told her that Daniel had big plans, that he talked a lot about growth and structure. I left out the part where he called me non-essential. I did not have the heart to put those words in her ears yet. I sat down at the table, took off my jacket, and pulled out the folded sheet slowly. It was a printed email thread. At the top sat a subject line that made my stomach turn. Ownership and signature simplification, draft steps. The thread showed messages between Daniel, the company's new outside lawyer I had barely met, and Ellen. I read gently, line by line. Daniel had written that he wanted all assets and accounts centralized under a single owner for operational clarity. He had asked for a clean structure with one decision maker. In later messages, he gave instructions about removing old signatories and preparing documents to transfer property, accounts, and company shares into his name. My name appeared in those sentences, not as a person, but as an obstacle to be cleared. Ellen's replies were cautious, full of questions about proper approvals and board resolutions. She asked if I had been consulted. Daniel answered in short, confident sentences. He said that as managing director, he was authorized to proceed and that I fully trusted him. Reading those words, I felt something tighten behind my ribs. I had given him my trust, yes, but not for this, not to watch him write me out of my own story. Laura set a bowl of soup in front of me and noticed my face. She asked if something was wrong with the food. I shook my head and slid the paper over to her. She read more slowly than I did, whispering some of the lines under her breath. Halfway down the page, her mouth pressed into a thin line. At the bottom, she set it down carefully, like it might break. She said she did not understand all the legal terms, but she understood enough to see that Daniel was trying to move everything into his hands. We sat there in silence for a while, listening to the ticking clock above the stove. I stared at the window, where our reflection blurred in the dark glass. 2 older faces, tired from work and worry, framed by the same curtains we had hung decades ago when we first bought this house. I remembered the day we signed the mortgage papers. I remembered Laura crying from relief in the parking lot because we finally had something that could not be taken by a landlord. Back then, the only person I thought might threaten that feeling was the bank. I never imagined it would be my own son. My mind went further back, to the beginning. When I started Ward Building Supply, I was 25 and had nothing but my hands and a small loan from a man who trusted my stubbornness more than my numbers. I delivered orders myself with an old truck that coughed smoke. Laura did the books on a second-hand table while listening to the radio. We did not have a logo then. Our brand was simply me showing up on time, with the right materials and making sure the invoice matched what I promised. When Daniel was born, I promised myself he would never have to work as hard as I did physically. I carried that promise like a second wallet. I left for work before he woke up and came back after he went to bed many days, but every weekend I tried to make up for it. Trips to job sites where he could watch cranes move, stops at the depot where workers slipped him candy. Even when I was tired, I would take him to the yard and let him help by stacking small pieces of wood. He used to tell his friends that his dad owned a warehouse full of everything needed to build a house. He sounded proud. Time, as it always does, moved forward. The business grew. We enlarged the warehouse, added office space, hired more staff. I traded tool belts for meetings and contracts, but I never stopped walking the floor. I made sure every worker knew I would stand behind them if they followed our rules. Pay on time, treat people fairly, fix mistakes fast. That was my whole philosophy. Simple, but it kept the doors open and the trucks running. When Daniel finished university, he came to work with us. I created a position for him in the office, thinking it would be good for him to see every part of the business from inside. Laura asked if I was sure. She worried that working together might cause tension. I said family businesses were built on that kind of tension and that someday he would take over. I believed that if he saw how things worked long enough, he would understand why we did them the way we did. At first, he seemed eager. He stayed late, asked questions, tried to understand our old systems. He complained about the software, the paperwork, the way some clients still called my personal phone instead of the office. I brushed that off as youthful impatience. He talked about modernizing, about online ordering, about social media. He said he could bring in new clients if we looked more professional. I told him I was open to improvement as long as we did not forget the people who got us here. Then he met Megan. She came into the picture like a strong wind in a crowded yard, moving everything without touching a thing. I still remember the first barbecue she attended at our place. She watched everything, from the layout of the food to the way workers spoke to me. She said she loved the story of a self-made founder and a family business. She also said, with a smile, that our logo looked like something from a different century and that our website felt like a charity page. She joked that it hurt her marketing soul. Everyone laughed, including me. Back then, I heard teasing, not warning. Over time, their jokes formed patterns. Megan would mention that big clients wanted to see young, sharp leadership. She would say that investor types did not want to shake hands with men who reminded them of their fathers. She said this while looking at Daniel, but her words landed on me. She suggested new branding, professional headshots, polished messaging. I did not mind that part. Change can be healthy. What I missed was the way she always framed Thomas Ward as a piece of history and Daniel as the future. Inside the office, things shifted slowly. People started going to Daniel for approvals on things they once brought to me. At first, I encouraged it, telling myself this was how a succession plan looked. Then I noticed that when I gave a decision, some staff would say they should check with Daniel just in case. It was like someone was quietly changing the wiring behind the walls. Lights still came on, but the switches had moved. The first time I felt truly small in my own business was not in a boardroom, but in a bar. It was a Friday evening, and I had stopped at the place near the industrial park where many of the younger staff liked to go after work. I sat at a corner table, nursing a beer, enjoying the sound of music and chatter. I heard laughter from a table behind me, familiar voices. Without meaning to, I started listening. They were talking about the new logo, the new website, the rebrand. One of them said that it was about time the company stopped looking like a small family shed and started looking like a real player. They praised Daniel for having the courage to make changes. One joked that the old man at the top had no idea what a brand even was. Another said that Daniel had told them he was working on taking full control soon, that lawyers were helping him simplify things. They all laughed when someone said that once everything was under Daniel's name, decisions would finally be quick, because they would not have to wait for the museum piece to sign. I sat there, staring at the bubbles in my glass, feeling older than I ever had. They had no idea I was there. I could have turned around and confronted them, told them that without my name on their paychecks, they would not have those drinks. But what would that do? Make them afraid of me for a week, then go back to the same jokes in different words. That night, walking home, the streetlights felt harsh. I told myself it was just young people talking big. I told myself I had always been tough enough to ignore nonsense. Back in the present, after reading Ellen's printout, those bar conversations and small office comments lined up in my memory like stakes in fresh concrete. A picture I had tried not to see was now fully visible. This was not just my son making clumsy moves. This was a slow, deliberate shifting of power, framed as modernization, pushed by a wife who saw me as an old brand element to phase out. All with my help, my trust, my silence. The next week at the office, I watched more closely. I saw how staff looked to Daniel first for every decision. I saw how Megan lingered in the background, giving him small nods and looks when he spoke certain phrases. I saw Ellen's tight shoulders and the way she shut her laptop quickly whenever Daniel walked by. I saw Carlos's jaw clench when Daniel dismissed his concerns about unrealistic delivery promises Megan had made to impress a new client. One afternoon, I stood near reception talking to a longtime supplier about delays at the port. When we finished, two younger managers walked past us, talking loudly. They did not lower their voices when I was in earshot. One of them said that once the lawyers finished the transfers and everything was finally in Daniel's name, the company would run so much smoother. The other agreed, adding that it was time leadership matched the modern image. That was when Daniel himself appeared, smiling, and told them they were right, that soon everything will be under one signature, mine, and then we can really move forward. He said it casually, as if discussing the weather, not the erasing of the man who built the ground he was standing on. The day after that comment about everything being under his signature, I woke up with a tight feeling in my chest that had nothing to do with age. It felt like standing on a floor that looked solid, but sounded hollow when you tapped it. I knew I had to stop guessing and see exactly what Daniel had done. Not what he said he was planning, what he had already changed. I did not tell Laura my full thoughts. I said I needed to stop by the bank to ask about some routine matters. She offered to come with me, but I told her to rest. I said it would not take long. The truth was, I needed to see the numbers first, before I saw her worry. The downtown branch was quiet, with soft music and the smell of polished floors. I took a number and waited on one of those small chairs that always feel like they were built for people with less weight on their shoulders. When my turn came, a young clerk in a neat shirt greeted me. He recognized the name. Many people in town still did. He asked how he could help. I told him I wanted to review the company accounts, confirm signatories, and check that everything was in order. I kept my voice calm, like this was a simple yearly check. He smiled and tapped on his keyboard. The smile faded a little as he read. He said that according to the system, the main business accounts now listed Daniel as the sole authorized signatory. He said some secondary accounts had been closed or merged. He wanted to know if I was asking about those. I felt my heartbeat in my throat, but I stayed steady. I asked him when those changes were made. He read the dates and said they were recent, all within the last few weeks. He added that forms had been filed, approved, and recorded. He said that, as far as the bank was concerned, everything had been done correctly with the information they had. I asked him if the system still showed me anywhere. He said that on some smaller accounts, I remained a contact, but not someone who could sign or authorize transfers. He spoke slowly, cautious now, like a person walking near the edge of a hole they could not see. I asked him if he could print me a simple overview. I did not ask for full statements. I did not want to cause a scene or raise flags. He hesitated, then said that he could give me a summary that showed account types and signatories. He printed it and slid it across the desk. I thanked him and put it carefully into a folder I had brought. Before I left, I asked one more question. I asked if any new loans or lines of credit had been opened in the company's name recently. He checked again. He said there were applications in process tied to some of the new merged accounts. He could not share full details without authorization from the current signatory, but his expression told me enough. My son was not only moving control into his hands, he was also lining up new debts on top of the house I had built. Outside, the air felt colder than when I went in. I sat on a bench for a moment and looked at the summary in my hands. One column, one name, my son's, the boy who once watched me sign our first truck loan with shaking hands, now removing my pen from the picture entirely, as if I was the risk, not the reason the bank ever trusted us. On the walk back to the parking lot, a thought came to me like a small light in the dark. The bank only saw what was presented to it. It did not know the full structure behind the company. It did not know that years ago, on the advice of a different lawyer, I had set up something separate. Back then, I just wanted to protect the business from any one accident, including myself. I never thought that decision might protect it from my own son. I decided not to go home yet. There was another office I needed to visit. The land registry building sat a few blocks away, a plain structure with tired walls and heavy doors. Inside, it smelled of old paper and dust. People lined up for forms and asked questions about boundaries and titles. I took another number, sat on another hard chair, and waited. When it was my turn, I stepped up to the counter and told the clerk I wanted to check the current title situation for 2 properties. I gave her the addresses, the warehouse lot and our family home. She typed, squinted at the screen, and then looked at me more closely. She asked for identification. I handed over my ID. She checked something again, then spoke in a careful tone. She said that as of now, the system still showed the title for both properties in the name of Ward Building Supply, and, for the house, my personal name as owner. But she added that there were recent applications in process. One application related to restructuring beneficial ownership for the business property, another related to adding an additional owner on the house. The dates matched the same weeks as the bank changes. I asked her if those applications were complete. She said they were pending, awaiting full documentation or final confirmation. She could not tell me more detail, but she said that if I had concerns, it might be wise to contact a lawyer because once changes were fully registered, they would be harder to undo. Her eyes held mine for an extra second. It was a small kindness, but I felt it. I thanked her and stepped aside. I did not argue. I did not ask who submitted the applications. I could guess. On paper, Daniel might have written that he was simplifying ownership for tax or business reasons. In his mind, he was likely writing the final chapter of my involvement. Driving home, my hands gripped the wheel harder than usual. I took slow breaths and counted them, the way I used to do when a crane lifted more weight than it should. Panic never kept steel from bending. Only clear thinking did. At home, Laura heard the car and came to the door. She asked how it went. I told her that Daniel had moved more quickly than I thought. I told her that our names were being shifted on screens and forms. Her face went pale. She asked if we were going to lose the house. I told her that nothing had happened yet that could not be answered. I did not promise everything would be fine. I had learned enough in life to know that promises without plans are just noise. That night in the bedroom, after she fell into a restless sleep, I sat on the edge of the bed with a small box in my hands. It was the same box I had pulled out when we paid off our mortgage years ago. Inside it sat old folders, a worn notebook, and a card with a woman's name and number. Priya Shah. I met Priya more than 15 years ago during a joint project where I supplied materials for a large development. She was the legal mind on the other side, sharp and calm. We clashed once over contract wording, and I respected the way she stood her ground without games. Later, when I thought about how to keep ward building supply safe from a random lawsuit or an accident on the yard, I called her. She helped me set up a simple holding structure, a small company that owned the majority of shares in ward building supply and the rights to the ward name. The holding company document had one owner, me. Back then, I did not involve Daniel. He was still young, still figuring himself out. I told myself that when he was older and more settled, I would explain everything. I pictured us sitting in the same bedroom, papers spread out, me walking him through the structure step by step. He would ask questions, I would answer, and he would see that all of it was for him and our future grandchildren. I delayed that talk every year, telling myself there was time. Now I understood that delay differently. It meant that when Daniel decided to move everything into his own name, he did so with incomplete information. He was shifting visible funds, properties, and roles. But he had no idea that a quieter layer still sat under everything like bedrock. A bedrock that did not carry his name yet, a bedrock that answered to me alone. I opened the notebook and looked at the simple diagrams Priya had drawn back then. Boxes, arrows, names. Nothing fancy, no tricks, just clear lines showing who owned what and under which rules. I reread my notes in the margins. Phrases about votes, about board meetings, about licensing the brand. I had never needed to use any of it. The company ran smoothly, and I was more interested in solving delivery problems than reading legal clauses. But the structure had been there, quiet and ready. A strange feeling settled over me as I sat there with those old papers. It was not joy, it was not even relief, it was something like gravity. For the first time since that humiliating meeting, I did not feel like a man standing on a floor someone else could pull away. I felt like a man who had laid foundations and forgotten some of them were still his. In that moment, a line formed in my mind. On one side stood the years of being a good father in the way I understood it, giving chances, making things easy, trusting without checking. On the other side stood something different, being a good steward of what I had built, even if that meant standing against my own son's plans. I realized I could not be both at once anymore. The humiliation in the boardroom and the bar chatter, the bank printout, the registry clerk's careful tone, Ellen's email thread, all of it pointed in one direction. Daniel saw me as a weak old man he could move off the board with a few signatures. He believed that my silence meant I was finished. He believed that his new systems and his wife's advice were stronger than the quiet decisions I had made long before he learned what a spreadsheet was. I sat there, feeling the weight of the box in my lap, and understood that this was my clarity moment. Not a burst of rage, not a dramatic speech, just a calm, final decision. I would not shout or throw papers. I would not beg my son to treat me better. I would go to someone who understood the language he trusted most, law, structure, ownership, and I would speak that language better than he expected. I picked up the card with Priya's name. The ink was a little faded, but the number was still clear. My hands shook slightly, but not from fear. From age, from long days, from everything. I steadied them, took my phone, and entered the number. I stared at the screen for a long second, hearing Laura's slow breathing behind me. Then I pressed call. The line rang once, twice. On the third ring, a calm voice answered and said it was Priya. I told her who I was and that I needed to talk about a family business and a son who thought I was useless. Priya did not sound surprised when I said I needed to talk about a family business and a son who thought I was useless. She told me that I could come by her office the next afternoon and that we would take it step by step. Her voice was calm, the way it had been all those years ago when she walked me through setting up the holding company. I ended the call and sat there for a while, listening to the quiet of the bedroom. Laura slept on, turned slightly away from me. I knew I would have to tell her more soon, but not before I knew exactly where we stood. The next day I drove to Priya's building. It was in a different part of town than the bank and registry, a street of old offices with small brass nameplates by the doors. Inside, the hallway smelled of paper and coffee. Her receptionist greeted me with a polite nod and led me to a conference room. The room was not fancy. A solid table, 3 chairs, a small window, shelves with thick folders. It reminded me of a site office on a big job. Cramped, practical, built for decisions. Priya entered with a notebook and a pen, no big stack of forms. She shook my hand and asked how long it had been. I told her it had been too long and that I was sorry to see her again under stress. She said that this was exactly when people needed her. Then she sat and asked me to tell her the story from the beginning, not just the legal parts. I started with Daniel's comments in the boardroom. I told her how he said he was just listening to his wife about my image, how he called me useless for growth, how he spoke about everything being under his signature soon. I described the email thread Ellen had printed, the bank visit, the registry office. I explained how I had found my own old notes from when we set up the holding company and the rights to the business name. I admitted that I had not thought about that structure in years. Priya listened without interrupting, writing sometimes, looking at me other times. When I finished, she rested her pen and said that the situation was serious but not hopeless. She reminded me of the basics we had set up years ago. She said that on paper, the holding company still stood between me and any big changes. She said that unless I had signed something recently to change that, my son's attempts to move assets might be running ahead of the law, not with it. She asked if I had signed any new documents in the last few months that I did not understand. I thought carefully and told her no. There had been no big meetings, no long forms pushed in front of me. Daniel had not asked for my signature on anything major. He had simply acted as if he no longer needed it. Priya nodded slowly. She said that arrogance often came with blind spots. We spread my papers on the table. I showed her the bank summary, the notes from the registry visit, and the printed email thread Ellen had given me. I did not show her full statements. That was for later, if we needed. For now, she just wanted to see the direction of the moves. She traced dates with her finger, comparing them to the timeline I had described. She said the pattern was clear. My son was trying to centralize visible control, but he had not checked the deeper structure. She did not jump to solutions. She said first we needed to confirm the current state of the holding company and the share register. She offered to pull the official records and see if anything had been changed without my knowledge. She also said we needed more internal proof of what Daniel was doing inside the company, not just my word, and one printout. She mentioned that staff emails, policy changes, and internal memos could all matter later if this turned into a formal dispute. I told her about Ellen's worried face and the way she had handed me the email. Priya said that if Ellen was willing to help, she should quietly save anything that showed Daniel's instructions or timelines. Priya made it clear that we should stay within the law. No hacking, no forced access, no secret recordings in private offices. She said the truth was strong enough if we respected the rules. I agreed. I had built my life on straight work. I was not going to start cutting corners now, even to protect myself. When we finished that first meeting, Priya summarized things in simple language. She said I was not powerless. She said that with the right steps, I could either stop Daniel's changes or reframe the company in a way that did not depend on him. She did not promise an easy path. She said there would be stress, maybe public conflict. I told her I had lived through storms before. This one just hurt more because it came from my own blood. A few days later, I met Ellen at a small cafe across from the bank. I chose that place on purpose. Neutral ground, public enough that no one would think we were plotting something strange, quiet enough that we could talk without shouting. She arrived with a plain shoulder bag and eyes that moved quickly around the room before she sat. She said she did not want to seem disloyal, but she could not ignore what she was seeing. She explained that Daniel had been sending instructions to the outside lawyer and to her, asking for changes to account permissions, asset lists, and internal reporting. She said he often described these moves as simple admin tasks, then added lines about me trusting him completely. Ellen said that did not match what she knew of me. I asked her if she felt safe sharing some of those instructions with me and my lawyer. She thought about it, then said that as long as she did it in a way that did not break company systems or rules, she was willing. She said that she had already started saving copies of certain emails and memos to a personal folder in case she ever needed to prove that she raised concerns. She talked about dates, subject lines, and how quickly Daniel wanted things done. I did not ask her to send anything right there. I told her that if she chose to help, my lawyer would give her a safe way to pass on information later. I also told her that I understood if she decided it was too risky. No job is easy to replace. She looked at me for a long moment and then said that she had worked at Ward's for more than 20 years because she believed in how I ran things. She said that whatever I decided to do, she did not want her quiet to be the reason Daniel got away with everything. After that meeting, Priya and I spoke more often by phone. She confirmed that the holding company records were unchanged. I still held the majority of shares and full control of the company that owned the business name. She said that on paper, nothing had been filed to move that ownership. Daniel had focused only on what he could see and touch. Bank accounts, visible property, roles. The deeper layer was still intact. She began to outline options. She said we could call for a formal meeting as majority shareholder, question Daniel's recent actions, and possibly remove him from his position if there was enough evidence of acting against the company's interests. She also mentioned that, because the business name was legally tied to the holding company, we could control who was allowed to use it. She did not go into every detail yet. She said we should move slowly, collect more proof, and pick the right moment. During this time, life at the warehouse continued on the surface. Daniel pushed new branding. Megan arranged glossy photos and posted them online. I watched from the floor as banners with updated logos went up. Workers joked about the new era. The old logo came down and went into storage. It felt like watching someone repaint a house while quietly trying to sell the land underneath. A week later, there was a construction trade expo in the city. Ward Building Supply had a small booth. Daniel insisted on being the main face there. He wore a fresh suit, had brochures with sleek designs, and spoke to visitors with practiced energy. Megan hovered nearby, guiding conversations, making sure certain phrases were used. I walked the hall slowly, greeting old contacts, shaking hands, ignoring the occasional double-take from people who assumed I had retired. At one point, I heard Daniel talking to a group of younger contractors. He described himself as the head of wards now, the one who had taken over from his father. He talked about fixing outdated systems and bringing real leadership to the company. He spoke as if I were a story from the past, not a person standing 20 feet away. Later, near the coffee stand, Ben found me. He is a contractor who has been with us almost from the start. He clapped a hand on my shoulder and asked how I was. I said I was still standing. He smiled, then lowered his voice. He said that he did not like the way Daniel spoke about me at the booth. He said that if I ever decided to step away from wards and do something simpler, something leaner, he would be interested in following. He was not the only one. 2 other clients hinted at the same thing over the course of the day. I did not promise anything to them. I just listened. But inside, another piece clicked into place. I saw that the true strength of the business was not logos or slides. It was relationships. Trust built over late deliveries handled well, price disputes solved fairly, promises kept. That trust ran through me more than through my son. If I moved, it would move with me. At the end of the expo day, I sat on a bench near the exit and checked my phone. There was a new email from Daniel, sent to senior staff. The subject line made my jaw tighten: Executive Strategy and Ownership Alignment Meeting. The body of the message was short. He said that he wanted to finalize leadership structure, clarify roles, and share the completed transition plan. The meeting was scheduled in the boardroom for the following week. Attendance was marked as mandatory. I stared at that invite for a long time. In the past, such a subject line would have made me feel defensive and tired. Now, after my visits to the bank, the registry, Priya's office, and the expo floor, it felt like something else. It felt like a stage being built without realizing another stage was rising just behind it. I accepted the invite with one tap of my thumb, slid the phone back into my pocket, and walked out of the hall into the cool evening air. The week before the meeting felt strange, like the quiet before a storm you can smell but not see yet. On the surface, everything in the business looked normal. Trucks came and went, invoices printed, workers loaded pallets. Daniel walked through the office with his usual quick stride, Megan at his side some days, talking to him in low tones. People laughed at his jokes, nodded at his plans. If you did not look closely, you would think nothing was wrong. If you did, you would see small details. Ellen's tight jaw, Carlos's narrowed eyes, the way a few older staff looked at me and then quickly looked away. Priya and I did not meet at her office again right away. Some of the work she did in the background, through filings and calls I never heard. She told me that for my own protection, it was better if she handled certain steps quietly and only told me what I needed to know. I trusted her. I had trusted her years ago when I was building something, and now I trusted her while I was protecting it. One morning, I drove to a modest building across town, not as grand as our warehouse, but clean and modern. On the directory board in the lobby, small metal strips listed different companies. At the bottom, a new name had been added. It was simple, without my family name, just 3 words that meant nothing to the public, but everything to me. Priya had suggested the structure. I had agreed because it did not feel like revenge. It felt like a backup plan finally being used. Inside the serviced office, the room was small but bright. A desk, 2 chairs, a filing cabinet, and a window that looked out over a car park instead of a loading bay. It did not matter. This was not about image, it was about function. A young receptionist for the building handed me a key card and a small folder with information about the lease. She treated me like any other tenant. I sat for a few minutes at the empty desk, listening to the hum of the air conditioning. For the first time in a long time, I sat in a space that did not have my son's shadow in it. Later that day, I met Priya there. She looked around, nodded, and said it would do fine. She explained in calm, simple language, that this office would be the address for a new company, one that had a legal relationship with the holding company and the ward name. She did not show me every clause, not yet, but she told me the important parts. This new entity would be able to trade, to sign contracts, to carry relationships. It would not answer to Daniel, it would answer to the owner of the holding company. That was still me. She laid out a thin stack of papers on the desk. They were not dramatic, not thick enough to look like a film scene, just serious, thin sheets with careful words. She went through each one aloud, line by line, making sure I understood the meaning, even if I did not understand every term. Some dealt with how the new company was linked to the holding company. Some dealt with how the name Ward Building Supply could be used and by whom. Some dealt with votes and meetings. When I was sure, I signed. My hand shook a little from age, not from doubt. I had signed a lot of papers in my life. Loans, supplier agreements, insurance policies. These felt different. Those had been about building something as big as I could. These were about shaping something as safe as I could. Priya countersigned where needed, made small notes, and gathered everything in a neat folder. She said that once the filings were processed, the structure would be standing behind me even if I said nothing in any room. We talked about Daniel's meeting invite. She said that we should let him think it was his idea to gather everyone and declare victory. She explained that arrogance likes a stage, and that sometimes the best thing you can do is let it build one. She advised me not to argue with him before the meeting, not to question him, not to hint that anything had changed. I told her I could do that. Keeping quiet was something I had practiced for years. The difference now was that silence would not mean surrender. At home, Laura watched me more closely. She asked if I was eating enough, if I was sleeping. I answered honestly. I said my sleep was light and my stomach tight, but that I had a plan. I did not tell her every detail. I did tell her that I had spoken with Priya and that we were taking steps to make sure we could not be forced out of our home or our security because of Daniel's choices. One evening, in the kitchen, I told her that there might be a time very soon when Daniel would be angry, confused, maybe even desperate. I said that he might call her, try to make her side with him, say that I had betrayed him. I did not tell her what exactly would happen. I only said that whatever he told her, the decisions I was making now were not about punishing him. They were about protecting the life we had built. She looked down at her hands on the table and said that she loved her son, but that she had seen enough to know he did not see us clearly anymore. She said that if she had to choose between his temper and our safety, she would choose our safety. In the days leading up to the meeting, I spent more time at the warehouse floor again. I walked slowly among the racks, asked about stock levels, listened to small complaints. People relaxed when they talked to me, even if they tried to hide it. Carlos pulled me aside one afternoon and said that whatever happened upstairs, the people on the floor knew who had always shown up for them. I thanked him without saying more. I did not want to put him in a position where he had to lie to Daniel later. I also made a few quiet stops. Coffee with Ben in the small cafe near the bank. A quick conversation with another longtime client in the yard while he checked his delivery list. I did not tell them everything. I did not ask them to sign anything. I simply asked them hypothetical questions. If this company changed hands, would they stay? If I started something simpler, more direct, would they consider moving their orders? None of them answered in hard numbers, but their faces and words told me enough. They said things like they trusted me, that they followed people, not logos, that they were tired of hearing big promises from young men who had never unloaded a truck in the rain. One afternoon, I was in the office reception when Daniel passed by with his outside lawyer, the one I had seen only briefly before. They were laughing about something on a tablet screen. Daniel saw me, gave a quick nod, and said he was looking forward to finally cleaning up the last pieces of the transition at the upcoming meeting. He said it would be good for everyone to have clarity. The lawyer smiled politely. I said that clarity was always good in business. That was all. Later, Ellen came to my small office, closed the door quietly, and sat down. She said she had been thinking about the meeting and that she wanted me to know some numbers before it happened. She did not hand me stacks of secret papers. She just told me, in plain words, how much of our revenue came from clients who had started with me, not with Daniel. She talked about which accounts were stable and which were risky, promised based on Megan's optimistic pitches. She said that Daniel believed in the new clients more than the old ones, but that the old ones were the backbone. I thanked her and told her that I understood. I said that there might be changes soon and that if she ever felt she needed a place where numbers were still treated with respect, she could call me. I did not promise a job. I did not recruit. I just reminded her that my phone would still exist when dust settled. The night before the meeting, I lay awake longer than usual. Laura slept, but I could hear little catches in her breathing, the kind that come when someone dreams of arguments they never want to have. I got up quietly, went to the kitchen, and made tea. The house was still, the only sound the hum of the fridge and the ticking clock. I thought about all the nights I had sat in this same kitchen worrying about deliveries, bills, and broken machinery. Those problems had always felt big. Now they felt simple compared to this. Metal breaks in predictable ways. People break in strange ones. I went to my small desk in the corner and opened a drawer. Inside lay a few personal items. Old photos, a watch my father had left me. I took out a small card with Priya's number and checked my phone. There was already a message from her, sent earlier in the evening while I was helping Laura with dishes. It was short. She said that filings were complete, that the structures were in place, and that tomorrow's meeting would not create power. It would only reveal it. She reminded me to stay calm, to answer questions simply, and to let Daniel speak first. The morning of the meeting, I dressed in my usual work clothes, not a suit. Clean shirt, decent jacket, boots brushed off. I did not want to play my son's image game. I wanted to walk into that room exactly as the man they thought they had already moved aside. Laura handed me a mug of coffee and touched my arm. She did not say good luck. She said to remember who actually built the walls that room stood in. Driving to the warehouse, I noticed every small thing. The cracks in the asphalt I had been meaning to fix, the faded paint on the fence, the dent in the gatepost from a delivery truck years ago. All of it was history. All of it was proof that real life rarely looks like a glossy slide. I parked in my usual spot and stepped out. The air smelled of fuel and damp wood. Inside, the office buzzed more than usual. People moved a little faster, spoke a little quieter. The words meeting and strategy floated in the air. I walked through reception. The girl at the desk gave me a nervous smile and said the meeting would start in 15 minutes. I thanked her, moved past, and climbed the stairs at a steady pace. At the top, I paused outside the boardroom door. Through the glass, I could see Daniel arranging his notes at the head of the table, Megan sitting at the side, scrolling on her phone. Ellen had her notebook open. Carlos stood near the back wall, arms crossed. A few other managers shuffled papers, adjusted chairs. It looked like every other meeting and nothing like them at the same time. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I took it out and glanced at the screen. A new message from Priya sat at the top. It was even shorter than the last one. She wrote that everything was ready, and that, whatever Daniel believed, the law was already standing behind me when I walked through that door. I slid the phone back into my pocket, took a slow breath, turned the handle, and stepped into the room. When I walked into the boardroom, the room went a little quieter. People shifted in their chairs. Daniel stood at the head of the table, a stack of papers in front of him, his laptop open to another one of his neat slide decks. Megan sat along the side wall again, one leg crossed over the other, phone in her hand. Ellen sat near the middle with her notebook open. Carlos stood at the back, not taking a seat, arms folded. There was one new face at the table, Priya, dressed in a simple dark suit, a folder in front of her, glasses resting low on her nose. Daniel introduced her to the room as outside counsel helping with finalizing the transition. He said it like she worked for him. She only nodded and said she was there to help clarify the legal position. Her eyes flicked to me for half a second, calm and steady, then went back to her folder. Daniel opened the meeting with his usual confidence. He thanked everyone for coming, talked about how far the company had come, praised the team, and then shifted to change. He spoke about how the market demanded speed and clear leadership. He said that too many signatures and too many voices slowed decisions. He reminded them of the rebrand, the new systems, the new clients. He said all of this needed to be matched by a simple ownership and authority structure. Then he started talking about the transition plan. He described how he had centralized operations, aligned bank accounts, and, with the help of legal, was bringing everything under one roof. He said that to avoid confusion, there would be one executive director. He did not say my name once. He spoke as if this was already done. As he talked, I watched faces. Ellen stared down at her notes. Carlos's jaw tightened. A few younger managers looked impressed. Others looked nervous. Megan smiled slightly every time Daniel used phrases like clean structure and modern leadership. When Daniel finished his speech, he said that this meeting was mostly to give everyone clarity and answer any questions. He said he understood that change could be uncomfortable, but that it was necessary for growth. He opened his hands as if inviting applause. No one clapped. I raised my hand slightly. He looked surprised, then said he was happy to give me the floor for any comments. He said it in a tone that suggested he was being generous, letting the old man speak before the new era began. I did not thank him. I turned instead to Ellen and asked if she could confirm, for the room, who currently owned the majority of shares in Ward Building Supply. Her eyes widened, but she answered. She said that, according to the last official register, a holding company owned 70%, and that Thomas Ward was the sole owner of that holding company. The room shifted, chairs creaked. Daniel tried to wave it off. He said that those were old records, that new documents were in process. He said the important thing was that he had operational control now. His voice was a shade faster. Priya opened her folder. She spoke in the same calm voice she had used in her office. She said that, as of that morning, the official records at the registry confirmed that nothing had changed in the holding company ownership. She said that all filings related to that company were verified, up to date, and still showed me as the only shareholder and director. Daniel frowned and asked what that had to do with the current transition. Priya explained patiently that the holding company owned the shares in Ward Building Supply and the rights to the Ward name. She said that any attempt to transfer assets, roles, or even the use of the business name without respecting that structure could be challenged. She added that, in fact, some of those attempts were already being challenged. She slid a thin stack of fresh documents toward Daniel. She said they were board resolutions, properly signed by the majority shareholder, changing the managing director of Ward Building Supply and revoking any informal powers Daniel had assumed without proper approval. She said that these resolutions were already filed and effective. The color drained from his face as he glanced at the pages. He said something about this being unnecessary, about conversations they had not had. Priya said, still calm, that the law did not require family conversations to recognize valid filings. It required proper ownership and signatures. She said those were present. She then turned one more page and explained something else. She said that the Ward name and logo were now licensed exclusively to a new operating company, controlled by the holding company, and that this license could not be used by any entity controlled by Daniel without breach. She did not say the new company's name out loud. She did not have to. I knew it. Ben would know it. Others would know it soon. People around the table started asking questions. Small ones at first, then sharper. Someone asked if this meant Daniel was no longer in charge. Priya answered simply that he was being removed as managing director of Ward Building Supply, effective immediately, pending any legal process he wished to start. Another asked what would happen to their jobs. She said that their contracts were with the company, not the person, and that any changes would be handled properly, but that some clients had already signed new agreements with the licensed entity controlled by me. Daniel turned to me then, eyes hot. He asked how I could do this to him, how I could go behind his back. He said he had only tried to make the company modern. He said he had assumed I trusted him. I told him, in a level voice, that I had trusted him until he called me useless in my own boardroom and told staff that everything would soon be under his name. I said I had listened when he claimed I was just a symbol and when he told people that I did not understand what he was doing. I said that I had decided to let the structures he dismissed answer him instead of my anger. Silence settled over the table. Megan started to speak, but no one looked at her. Ellen took a slow breath, closed her notebook, and sat straighter. Carlos unfolded his arms. A junior manager near the end of the table asked, in a careful voice, what this meant for the future of the business. I said that, from today, the business would be run by people who remembered what built it. I said that anyone who wanted to work in a place where promises meant something could talk to me after the meeting or in the days ahead. I did not raise my voice. I did not threaten. I simply stood, took my old access card from my pocket, and set it down in front of Daniel. I told him that if he wanted to keep playing at being a modern leader, he was welcome to do it with whatever was left after the law and the clients had their say. Then I walked out. Downstairs, the office felt different. People watched me pass, some with wide eyes, some with small nods. I did not stop. I left the building, stepped into the cool air, and walked to the small cafe across from the bank. I ordered a coffee and sat at a corner table by the window. My phone started buzzing on the table before the cup even arrived. Daniel's name flashed on the screen. Then again, then again. Messages, calls, more messages. I watched the number climb, past 10, past 30, higher each minute. I did not pick up. I did not read. I turned the phone face down, wrapped my hands around the warm cup, and listened to the quiet hum of other people's lives as my own phone vibrated uselessly against the wood.